Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Terrence here with fishnetproductions.com, coming to you with another video today on compression. Now, there's still a lot of confusion going on behind compression and understanding what it's for, how it works, what are the different functions and stuff like that. So I hope to settle a lot of that in this video today and get you on your way with compression, and also show you how simple compression is once you understand the concept. So let's jump right in. Now, I have 5 different compressors here set up just to show you how common and how easy this is to set up compression and what these functions are for. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard by now what the different functions are as far as the knobs, the attack and release, threshold, and all of those functions. So I won't go through all of them. I'll just mention them briefly here. So basically what the threshold is the volume at which the compressor kicks in. So whatever volume that's playing through here, you can set this to kick in when a volume hits a certain level or whatever the case may be based on what you hear. The attack is how fast this compressor reacts to that volume. So if you set it here on the threshold and it's at a certain volume, this is how fast it's going to react to it. Same thing with the release. It's actually the opposite of the attack. It's how fast the compressor lets go of the signal once it's below the threshold and once it's no longer compressing. So fast or slow. Same thing on most compressors. It's either you can set it to fast or slow. Some knobs just say fast and slow, but this particular plugin has different settings where you can set it at different levels and stuff like that. Same thing here. Ratio is basically another knob that's very, very common on compressors. Basically what it does is it sets, or it says, the amount of volume that's going to come out versus the volume that's coming in. So here, for an example, is set to 4:1. So for every 4 decibels of volume that's coming in, only 1 is going to come out. Same thing here if you set it for 2. If 2 decibels of volume is coming in, then only 1 is going to come out. 10 on most compressors, that's probably limiting, which for every 10 that's going in, only 1 is coming out, and that's kind of considered limiting, just depending on the plugin. Now, on different plugins, you'll see different settings, and they won't all be called the same because some compressors have their own set ratios and their own set attack and release time. So you may not see those buttons, but these are the most common buttons that you'll see on the different models of plugins of compression. Now, let's take a look at how that works and what that means in terms of sound. Now, what we're looking at here is a waveform of a vocal recording. Now, in any recording, you're going to have what's called peaks and transients, which is mainly what you'll probably be dealing with compression. So let me show you what that looks like and what compression does to it. So as you see here, this is a vocal. This is mainly in these middle parts here where you can see the larger part of the waveform, and these larger parts here is where the bulk of the vocal is and where the vocal is probably centered in terms of volume. Now, what you have up here, up tops, like this large area here, are peaks. Now, the reason that this peak is a problem is because you're going along, you got your audio going, you got your track going along, everything is fine, and then it gets to this point, and then your vocal just jumps out and peaks out. And, it's loud at a certain point and then goes back down to a certain volume. Same thing here, a lot of louder parts here, a lot of softer parts here. So you have a lot of inconsistencies in terms of the dynamics, which is, the difference between the loudness and the softness of the track. Now, what compression is going to do is help you even out this waveform. It'll help bring these peaks down, help bring these lower parts up, so you have a more even track all the way across. So you don't have to worry about your vocal or whatever the instrument is that's jumping out or getting low or getting too loud at certain times and things like that. So what you're going to do is basically, if you're going to set a compressor here on this waveform here all the way across, basically what a compressor is going to do, depending on how you set it, you'll set the ratio for whatever your particular tastes are. Usually it's somewhere around 2:1 or 4:1, just depending on the instrument and what you're trying to achieve, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Now, let's just say you set it to 4:1. Now, 4:1 is going to mean for every 4 decibels of volume that's going in, only 1 is going to come out. So that means the compressor is going to take probably peaks like this peak right here, turn it down so that it's more even or at least less loud than what you see here in the main part of the vocal. So you won't have this big, whatever this is, it's maybe a P or some kind of plosive or something like that that's jumping out. So you won't have that jumping out of your mix. So what that will allow you to do is once you have this turned down, you can then adjust the gain of your whole track. You can turn it up. That way this part is not extremely loud. You get more volume out of these softer parts, which helps even out your track. So let me talk about what that means in terms of attack and release. Basically what you have here, you see you have this peak here. I'm trying to move this one. This peak right here, you see you have that sort of at the beginning of whatever this word here is in the vocal. So the word starts right down here, and then you have this peak here. So basically what this means, let's just say this was the only thing you were trying to compress, this one word. Basically what this means is that your peak is at the beginning of this word. You see how it's toward the beginning here. If this is the beginning, this would be the center, and this is toward the end. This peak here is at the beginning of the word. So in order to catch this, you would probably want a faster attack, because once you set the attack to something fast, it'll catch the beginning of this. If you set the attack on your compressor slow, then the compressor won't kick in maybe likely until you get around the middle of here, and it may miss that. So that should help you understand a little bit more the attack and release time of a compressor. So just depending on what you have that's peaking, how fast it's peaking and stuff like that, that will depend on how you set the attack and release time of your compressor. Now the same thing with the release time. So if this is the only peak here and everything else is pretty even, for me, I'm going to want that compressor to get off the compression really fast. So I'll set, for me, for this, if I was just compressing this particular word here, I would set a fast release time and a fast attack time for the compressor to kick in really quick once this happens and to get right back off of it so it can just move on. So that's the way you use attack and release time for peaks on certain things. Now again, this is probably an extreme example because most of the time you're going to be compressing an entire track, but it actually means the same thing. So what you do is you look at these waveforms all the way down, or you listen to them. You don't necessarily have to do this visually. Most of the time you'll probably be doing it as listening anyway. So if you have a lot of peaks and a lot of vocals and stuff like that, or whatever the track may be, you can listen to these waveforms, look at them, and listen for where the peaks come in, see how fast they're coming in. If they're happening really fast, then that means you're probably going to want to set your compressor to a fast attack time to catch them. If they're happening really slow, maybe a long vocal where somebody's holding a note and then it gets loud toward the end or something like that, maybe that's a need for something like a slow attack time or something like that, but you can base that on what you hear. So that's how you set the attack and release time on your compression. It's as simple as that. It's a very objective way. You're not just randomly setting the knobs to say, hey, let me just see what works. You're actually listening for what's happening, and then you're setting your attack and release times based off what you hear. Now, let me give you an example of what this is like and what this sounds like on this vocal track. So let me play the vocal track a little bit so you can hear what's going on. Here we go.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it.
Okay, as you can hear in the part that we were looking at on the waveform here in this vocal track, it's this little part right here that's peeking out, and then you can hear how it gets softer down in here. So I think she's saying thought right there. You thought, when that thought jumps out. So listen to it again, listen to that part, and then listen how it gets quiet all the way down here.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it.
So as you can see and hear from this waveform, there are peaks that need to be tamed. There are low parts that probably need to be turned up, and you can see that consistently throughout this track. All the way here, you can see more here, all the way through. So you can kind of tell where your peaks and stuff that need to be tamed. So what we're going to do with this compressor is try to even all of this out so we don't have that thought word right there jumping out at us, and we don't have this lower part here getting softer when we're trying to hear the vocal in the track. So basically what we're going to do first here is set the ratio. Now generally I just always set my compressors to 4:1 and I leave it there. It's generally a good ratio to start with, and it generally ends up being the ratio I always keep. So for me, I just set it at this 4:1 and just leave it there. Now, sometimes it may change depending on what I'm hearing with my ears and what I'm getting out of the track. But most of the time for me on most compressors, it's around either 3:1 or 4:1. So I just set it there and leave it there. And that's kind of what I recommend people doing too. This is not really that big of a thing once you get, especially once you have compressors like this, where you just have 3 settings, where you basically have a small setting, a medium setting, and then the most extreme setting, which is on most compressors is pretty much limiting. But anyway, that's what I do on my ratio. You're free to, kind of experiment with that how you want it. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is just let the track play, and then I'm going to set the threshold to where I'm getting maybe 3 or 4 dBs of compression. So I'm going to just watch this meter here, go up to maybe around 3 or 4, and no more compression than that. That's generally what you need for something like this for the peaks. That's not too extreme for something like this vocal track. So let me let that play, and I'll just do that now. Here we go.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it.
Right. So I'm already getting a good 3 or 4 dBs of compression. It actually sounds pretty good. I think I want to catch that thought a little bit faster than what I have here. I have the slowest setting on the attack. Now, generally, that's what I do with my attack settings as well. I start off with the slowest attack on there, and then I just adjust it depending on what I hear. So let's do that. And this is probably going to change the amount of compression that I'm getting on my meter here, so I'll always go back and adjust that. But let me just set the attack time first, and then I'll go back and do that. All right, here we go.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you want. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect. You thought you had me wrapped up like. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it.
All right, that's generally what I want on this compressor here. As you can see, the compressor now is only really kicking in on these plosives here and these peaks. So watch the meter on this peak here, and once you get to some of the smaller ones here, you'll hear it kick in. And then the rest of the time, it's not doing any compression at all. So check this out.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it.
Right, so you see how on those peaks there. So basically all I've done is just tame the peaks. I've just tamed here. That means these peaks are turned down versus what they were in the first place. And I'll A and B that and let you check it out. So I'll start with it off, and then I'll loop it with it on. Here we go.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it.
Big difference there, big difference, and more even sound. And that's basically all you're going for with compression. That's what you're doing on any compressor that you're using. You're trying to even out the sound. Now, I've done a video on this in the past, and what I've advocated in the past is that basically what you use compression for is one of two things. You're either trying to control dynamics, or you're trying to create some sort of effect, because a lot of compressors have their own particular sound, which gives them a certain quality or a certain effect that you may be going for. So for example, on drums or something like that, you may be going for some punch or something like that, or what's called punch on, your snare drum or on your kick drum or something like that. And that's doing something different than simply evening out the dynamics of that sound. You're going for something very specific sounding, and that's what I call creating an effect. Now with that, if I wanted to do that on this vocal, which a lot of people do on their vocals, I'm not a big fan of it, but a lot of people do that. So what you're doing here in essence to create some sort of an effect, you're not really trying to even out the dynamics as much as you are trying to give a certain sound, because this, like this SSL compressor here, has its own sound, its own analog sound. So when I compress it really, really hard, it gives me a certain effect. So what I'll do, I'll set the attack time as fast as it'll go, turn the release time maybe up to about halfway or something like that. Get a lot of compression going, maybe 8 to 10 to 12 dB of compression going out of it, and listen for the sound that it's giving me. So check this out.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it.
Now, as you can hear, it did actually even out the performance. That's actually a sort of a byproduct of trying to create this effect with, large amounts of compression. But more so, it gave a certain sound or a certain quality or a certain texture to this sound that you didn't hear before the compressor was turned on. So listen to it with off. I'll just A and B it really, really quickly so you can hear that, what it sounds like. Check it out.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it.
Very, very, very different sound in the compressor. And that's what I mean by going for an effect when you're using compression. Now, the next thing I want to deal with very briefly is what's called transients. Now, transients in terms of sound is very, very easy to understand. Basically, you can think of it as the beginning part of the sound. So what I have here is a snare drum hit. This is one snare drum hit. So you see how long this waveform is here. The snare drum hit starts here, goes all the way right here, and then ends probably somewhere right there. Now, the transient of this snare drum hit would be this part of the sound here before it sort of starts to even out and die off. So this is kind of the decay, and the beginning part of it is the transient. Now, why is this important and how does it apply to compression? Well, it's the same thing I was just talking about in terms of the peaking vocals. Basically, what you have here is a hard snare drum hit. The first part of this sound is what you're going to hear, and then the latter part of this snare drum hit is what's going to die off. So when you have a bunch of instruments going on in your mix, basically all you'll hear is this transient part of the mix, and then this part here will be so soft that it will be drowned out by other instruments. Now, generally speaking, it's not a problem to have a snare drum hit do this. This is what a snare drum naturally sounds like when you hit it. You're going to hit it, it's going to give that initial attack, and then the sound is going to die off. In most sounds, it's going to do that. So it's not a problem per se, but if you want to change this in your mix or get some type of effect from this, a compressor is a good way to use it. Or if you want this part of the snare drum to be heard, this latter part of the snare drum to be heard in your mix, a compressor could do that, because you could turn down this transient here, which will make this even out. We'll probably give it, turn down the volume somewhere to right here, and you won't have all of these peaks right here. You'll have a more even sounding snare drum. So once you turn this down, then you can take your fader and turn up this track where all of the parts of the snare drum can be heard, the attack and the decay of it. Now, that may or may not be your preference. Some people like to leave the attack in there and then simply compress this part of the snare drum here, and either do something to it to give it an effect or turn it up. This is kind of where we get a lot of terms like punch and stuff from, because you can compress this part of the snare drum, still have this part of the hit, compress it really hard, and then turn it up to match the volume here, and it'll make your snare drum sound really, really, really punchy. And that's what you're doing in terms of the waveform. Now, let me let you hear what that sounds like. Okay, so here I'm going to take the compressor and I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with the vocal so you can hear what that sounds like. So let me play the track and then I'll adjust my threshold here. My ratio is already set to 4:1 like I had it. My attack time is always slow, so I can adjust that once I get it in. And I'm going to start adjusting the threshold until I get, 4 or so dB of compression. So here we go. Now you can already hear from me just adjusting this threshold and getting 4 dB or so of compression. The snare drum sound has changed. Now let me tell you what to listen for. Once the snare drum plays, I'm going to A and B it, I'm going to turn it off, and then I'll turn it on. What you will listen for is that tone of the snare drum. It sounds like it's hitting somewhere maybe around an A, maybe an A flat or something like that. Listen to that tone of that snare drum jump out more once I turn the compressor on. Okay, here we go. So you hear what's happening there? Basically what's happening is that transient, what we talked about, is being turned down, and that makes the snare drum, the tone of the snare drum, come out a little bit more because that transient is being turned down. And here all I've done is adjust the threshold. Now again, that's going to change when I start to mess with the attack time. So let me change the attack time. Once I change the attack time to faster, of course I'm going to get a little bit more compression. It's going to be catching the beginning part, more of the beginning part of that snare drum hit. So let me just go ahead and set it to 1 right now, and then I'll readjust the threshold and you can see what that sounds like. Okay, so you can hear what you're getting there is a whole lot less of the attack, a lot less of that stick hitting the snare drum, and that's because I'm turning down that transient, and I'm catching that transient, and it's being turned down. Now, for me particularly, I do not like that sound, so this is not what I would do to a snare drum, but a lot of people do like this sound. A lot of people like this snare drum sound in their mix. There's nothing wrong with it. Just for me, particular for my taste and the type of music that I like, I don't like that type of snare drum sound. I like a more natural sound. So I would generally leave that transient alone, let it pass through the compressor a little bit before it gets compressed, leave this attack time a little bit slower. Same thing here with the release time. So I would generally on percussive instruments, I would set the release time to where it's dying out, or the compression is all the way back at 0 by the time it hits the next snare drum hit. Now with ratios and compressors who have set release times like this, it may be a little bit harder to do because you can't set micro increments like you can other compressors, but we can try to go for the closest thing. So let's do that with the release time here. Right, so that compressor is hitting right back at 0 right around the time the next snare drum is about to hit. Take a look at the meter here again while I play it. So what this does is give the compression a sense of musicality with working in time and in tandem with the timing of your song. So that's generally what I like to do with compressors. But I wanted to show you this in terms of compression so you can see how simple it is to set these compressors and just literally leave them alone. Compression is not really that complicated. You can make something more complicated out of it. You can get into, different types of stuff and different types of things with people stacking compressors and parallel compression and all of that kind of stuff. But again, at its core level, this is what compression is, and this is what compression does, and this is what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to do one of two things: either control the dynamics, which are the peaks and certain things like we did in the vocal track and in the snare drum track, or you're trying to create some sort of effect, like with the snare drum you're trying to create punch or something like that, or drive, or whatever the different words are that we use to describe these different types of sound. So anyway, guys, I hope this helped you out a lot. I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope you understand compression a little bit more than what you did, and this has simplified it for you. Listen, make sure you go subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be putting out a lot more videos very, very soon, and you guys are not going to want to miss those. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button right there in the right hand corner, and I'll see you guys in the next video.